You have 3 days to leave the house. Harper's voice cut through the Sunday dinner like a blade, her smirk perfectly practiced. Mom and Dad sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths, saying nothing. The roast beef grew cold between us as silence stretched across the table. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out the deed to our family home, and placed it beside the mashed potatoes. Actually, I said, my voice steady as steel, you all have 24 hours to get out of my house. My name is Samantha Quinn, and I should have known better than to expect a normal family dinner. The dining room looked picture-perfect that Sunday evening, Mom's best china gleaming under the chandelier, the mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, candles flickering like everything was still normal between us. The smell of roast beef filled the air, mixed with the earthy aroma of roasted vegetables and the sharp tang of red wine. It was the kind of scene that belonged in a magazine spread about American family traditions. But the Quinn family had never been good at keeping up appearances for long. I sat in my usual spot, the chair closest to the kitchen, where I could jump up to refill water glasses or grab forgotten napkins. Harper had claimed the seat across from me, the one with the best view of the living room, where she could monitor her domain. Dad carved the roast with surgical precision, his movements mechanical, while Mom passed around the green beans with the kind of forced smile that meant she was already 3 glasses into the wine. "This is lovely, isn't it?" Mom said, her voice pitched higher than usual. "Just like old times," Harper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Mom. Nothing's like old times anymore." I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting my meat into smaller and smaller pieces. The familiar weight of being the outsider settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. It had been 3 months since Harper moved back home, and already the house felt too small for both of us. She'd slipped back into her role as the golden child with practiced ease, while I remained what I'd always been, the responsible one, the invisible one, the one who kept everything running while everyone else lived their lives. "Samantha, you're awfully quiet tonight," Dad said, not looking up from his plate. His voice carried that particular tone he used when he was making an effort to include me in conversations that felt forced. "Just enjoying the meal," I replied, taking a sip of wine. The Merlot was expensive, too expensive for our usual budget, but Harper had insisted on it during her grocery shopping expedition earlier that week. "Well, I have some news," Harper announced, setting down her fork with deliberate ceremony. The candlelight caught the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one she'd bought herself after her latest business venture supposedly took off. "I've been thinking about the living situation here." The room went quiet except for the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned long ago not to react when Harper was building up to something. "Oh?" Mom leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. She always perked up when Harper had announcements to make. "It's just that this house is really meant for a family, you know, not for—" Harper's gaze swept over me dismissively. "Well, not for grown adults who should probably be establishing their own lives by now." There it was, the opening shot in what I'd been expecting for weeks. Harper never could resist a dramatic build-up. "I mean, I'm only staying temporarily while I get my coaching business off the ground," she continued, her voice taking on that saccharine tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "But some people seem to think this is a permanent arrangement." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't say anything. He never did when Harper was on one of her campaigns. Mom just nodded along, as if Harper's words made perfect sense. I set down my wine glass carefully, the crystal making a soft clink against the wood. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Harper?" Her smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for you to spread your wings a little, find your own place, start your own life." The words hung in the air like smoke. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. This was how it always went. Harper would make her pronouncements, and everyone would wait to see if I'd fight back or fold. "That's an interesting perspective," I said quietly. reaching for my purse beside my chair. Especially considering who actually owns this house. Harper's smile faltered for just a moment. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out the manila envelope I'd been carrying for 3 months, ever since Harper moved back in. The envelope that contained the deed, the mortgage payments, the bank statements, all the evidence of what I'd done to save this house while Harper was off in Florida playing life coach to divorcees and desperate housewives. It means, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, that you might want to reconsider who needs to find somewhere else to live. The candles continued to flicker, casting dancing shadows across the faces of my family. But something had shifted in the room, something that couldn't be taken back. The game Harper thought she was playing had just changed rules. And for the first time in years, I was the one holding all the cards. 3 years ago, this house was 24 hours away from foreclosure. I remember the exact moment I found out, standing in the kitchen where we'd just eaten dinner, holding the certified letter from the bank while rain hammered against the windows. The words blurred together. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings. 30 days to cure default. Dad had gambled everything on a tech startup that promised to revolutionize online shopping. The company folded in 6 months, taking our family's financial security with it. Mom had just started her second round of chemotherapy then. The breast cancer had come back with a vengeance, and the medical bills were drowning us faster than Dad's investment losses. I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table at 3 a.m, surrounded by insurance forms and medical statements, her bald head covered by one of the silk scarves Harper had sent from Florida, the only help my sister had offered from 1,500 miles away. We can't tell Harper, Mom had whispered that night, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. She's building her new life down there. She doesn't need this stress. Dad had aged 10 years in those 6 months. His hair went completely gray, and he developed a nervous habit of rubbing his hands together when he thought no one was looking. He'd taken a job at the hardware store, the same place he'd worked summers during college, 40 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. I can fix this, he kept saying, like a mantra. I just need time to figure it out. But time was exactly what we didn't have. Harper, meanwhile, was posting Instagram photos from Miami beaches, talking about her incredible journey of self-discovery and her new career as a life coach. She'd moved there after her divorce, chasing some guy who promised to help her build a wellness empire. The relationship had ended badly, though she never admitted it. But she'd stayed, reinventing herself as a guru for women seeking authentic empowerment. Her last visit home had been 2 years earlier, for Christmas. She'd spent the entire time complaining about the house being outdated, the neighborhood going downhill, and Mom's cooking being too heavy. She'd left after 3 days, claiming she had a breakthrough session with a client who couldn't reschedule. So when the foreclosure notice arrived, when Mom started crying into her coffee every morning, when Dad began drinking himself to sleep in his recliner, I made a decision that would change everything. I liquidated my 401k. Every penny I'd saved for 15 years of working at the accounting firm, gone. I took out a personal loan against my salary, maxing out my credit to the point where I was eating ramen for dinner and walking to work to save gas money. I sold my car and bought a used Honda with 200,000 miles on it. I gave up my apartment and moved back into my childhood bedroom, telling my parents it was temporary, just until I could help them get back on their feet. The bank had been surprisingly cooperative once I showed up with a cashier's check for the full amount owed. They were happy to avoid the foreclosure process, and even happier to restructure the mortgage with me as the primary borrower. My income was stable, my credit was good, and I had a 15-year relationship with the bank through my work. What I didn't tell my parents was that I'd put the house entirely in my name. The deed, the mortgage, the property taxes. Everything ran through me now. I'd saved their home, but legally, it had become mine. I told myself it was just a precaution. Dad had proven he couldn't be trusted with major financial decisions, and Mom was too sick to handle that kind of stress. If something happened to them, at least the house would be protected. If Dad decided to chase another get-rich-quick scheme, he couldn't use the house as collateral. It was responsible. It was practical. It was the smart thing to do. But deep down, I knew it was also insurance against exactly what was happening now. I don't understand, Harper said, her voice cutting through my memories. The envelope was still in my hand, its contents representing 3 years of sacrifice she knew nothing about. What are you trying to say? I looked at my parents, both of whom had gone very still. Dad's fork was suspended halfway to his mouth, and Mom's wine glass sat forgotten in her hand. They knew, of course. They'd known all along who'd saved them, who'd given up everything to keep them in the house they'd lived in for 30 years. But they'd never acknowledged it, not once. It was easier to pretend that the crisis had just resolved itself. That Dad's hardware store salary and Mom's disability checks were somehow enough to cover the mortgage payments, the property taxes, the insurance. They'd been living in my house for 3 years, and they'd never once thanked me. I'm saying, I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, that maybe you should ask Mom and Dad to tell you what really happened when you were too busy finding yourself in Florida to notice that we were about to lose everything. Harper's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Mom made a small sound, almost like a whimper. Dad set down his fork and stared at his plate as if it held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. It means, I said, opening the envelope with deliberate slowness, that while you were posting sunset photos and talking about manifestation and abundance, I was saving the house you're now trying to kick me out of. The papers rustled as I pulled them out, the deed with my name on it, the mortgage statements showing my payments, the bank records documenting every sacrifice I'd made. 3 years of proof that the golden child had been golden precisely because someone else was willing to tarnish herself to keep the family afloat. Harper's face had gone pale, but her jaw was set in that stubborn line I remembered from childhood. You're lying. Am I? I spread the documents across the table, right next to the good china and the expensive wine. Why don't you ask them? Harper came back on a Tuesday in March, 3 months ago, dragging 2 oversized suitcases and a wounded pride she tried to disguise as spiritual growth. I've decided to pivot my energy northward, she announced from the front porch, as if she were a CEO addressing shareholders instead of a 34-year-old woman whose life had imploded in spectacular fashion. Florida was becoming too limiting for my vision. The truth, which I pieced together from her carefully edited phone calls over the previous weeks, was that her fiancé, the wellness guru who'd promised to make her a star in the self-help world, had been running his empowerment retreats as elaborate schemes to sleep with vulnerable women. When Harper confronted him, he'd not only denied everything, but had the audacity to suggest she was projecting her own insecurities onto him. She'd packed up her life in Miami and driven straight home. But she'd never admit defeat. Instead, she spun it as a conscious choice to reconnect with her roots and family values. Mom cried when she saw her. Actually cried, standing in the doorway with her arms outstretched like Harper was a war hero returning from battle instead of a failed entrepreneur running from another disaster. Dad rushed to help with her luggage, his face brighter than I'd seen it in months. Just for a few weeks, Harper said, settling into the living room like she'd never left. Until I figure out my next move. Within 24 hours, she'd completely disrupted the careful balance I'd maintained for 3 years. The first change was the master bedroom. Mom and Dad had been sleeping there, obviously, but Harper somehow convinced them that the room's energy would be better for her healing process. She needed space to meditate, to journal, to process her transformation. Before I knew it, my parents were moving into the guest room, and Harper was redecorating the master suite with crystals and essential oil diffusers. It's just temporary, Mom assured me, though she looked exhausted from sleeping on a mattress that was too soft for Dad's back problems. You know how sensitive Harper is to her environment. I bit my tongue. I'd been sleeping in the small den off the kitchen for 3 years, on a fold-out couch that left my back screaming every morning. But apparently, my comfort had never been a consideration. Harper transformed the house with the efficiency of a conquering army. She replaced Mom's country-style kitchen curtains with flowing white fabric that looked ethereal but blocked most of the natural light. She rearranged the living room furniture to create what she called better energy flow, which mostly meant everything faced the chair where she held court every evening. She took over the grocery shopping, filling the cart with organic quinoa and free-range chicken that cost 3 times what we'd been spending. When I mentioned the budget, she waved me off with a laugh. Money is just energy, Samantha. You have to spend it to circulate it. Easy to say when you weren't the one paying the bills. But the worst part wasn't the financial strain or the constant disruption. It was watching my parents transform back into the people they'd been before the crisis. The people who orbited around Harper like planets around the sun. Suddenly, Dad was animated again, asking Harper about her business plans and her clients in Florida. He'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, listening to her talk about manifestation and abundance mindset, nodding like she was sharing profound wisdom instead of recycled self-help platitudes. Mom started cooking elaborate meals again, dishes that Harper remembered from childhood, dishes that took hours to prepare. She'd light up when Harper complimented her pot roast or asked for the recipe for her famous apple pie. For a client who needed comfort food energy. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Not abruptly, but with a subtle shift that made it clear I was interrupting something important. They'd smile at me, include me in the surface-level chatter. But the real conversations, the ones about Harper's plans, her future, her needs, those happened when I wasn't around. I became invisible in my own house. Harper was masterful at it, I had to admit. She never directly excluded me or said anything cruel. Instead, she'd make little comments that subtly reinforced my position as the family caretaker rather than an equal member. Sam's always been so practical, she'd say when I questioned her spending. She doesn't understand the creative mind. Or, Sam's comfortable with routine. Not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship. Or, my personal favorite, Sam's always been happiest when she's taking care of others. It's her gift. Each comment was delivered with a warm smile, as if she were complimenting me. But the message was clear. I was support staff, not family. I was the one who kept things running while the important people lived their lives. The worst part was that my parents bought into it completely. They'd nod along, as if Harper were revealing deep truths about my character instead of systematically diminishing me. She's always been our little helper. Mom would agree, patting my hand like I was 12 instead of 31. By the end of the first month, Harper had established herself as the queen of the house she'd abandoned 3 years earlier. She held court in the living room every evening, regaling Mom and Dad with stories from her coaching practice and her plans to disrupt the wellness industry with her unique approach. I'd sit in the kitchen, paying bills and managing the household finances that kept us afloat, listening to them laugh at Harper's jokes and gasp at her insights. The sound of their happiness felt like knives in my chest. But Harper wasn't done yet. She never was. The second month brought a new campaign, concern for my well-being. Harper started making subtle comments about how I seemed stuck and afraid to grow. She'd bring up articles about adults who lived with their parents, always framing it as worry for my personal development. I just want to see you spread your wings, she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. You're so capable, Sam. You could do anything you set your mind to. The implication was clear. Anything except live in the house I'd saved. Mom and Dad started echoing her concerns. Suddenly, they were worried about my social life, my career prospects, my future. They'd never expressed these concerns before Harper's return. But now they seemed genuinely troubled by my lack of independence. Maybe Harper has a point, Dad said one evening, after Harper had given a particularly persuasive speech about the importance of launching into adulthood. You've been so focused on helping us, you might have forgotten to focus on yourself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show them the sacrifice I'd made, the years I'd given up, the future I'd mortgaged to save theirs. But I also knew it wouldn't matter. Harper had already rewritten the narrative. I wasn't the daughter who'd saved them. I was the daughter who'd gotten too comfortable with being saved. 3 months in, Harper announced her latest business venture, a life coaching practice specializing in family dynamics and healthy boundaries. She'd be working from home, using the house as both her office and her healing space. "It's perfect," she told Mom and Dad over dinner. "I can help people while being close to family. And having my own space will let me really focus on building something meaningful." That's when I knew she was never planning to leave. The temporary stay had been a lie from the beginning. Harper had come home to claim her inheritance, and she was methodically pushing me out to make room for her permanent residence. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that the house still belonged to our parents, that she could manipulate them into giving her what she wanted. She had no idea that for 3 years, she'd been maneuvering to claim something that was already mine. The signs of my disappearance from the family started small, like hairline cracks in a foundation that you don't notice until the whole structure starts to shift. It began with the photo albums. Mom had always been meticulous about family pictures, arranging them chronologically in thick leather albums that lived on the coffee table. But when Harper started her healing journey, she convinced Mom that the living room needed cleaner energy and less visual clutter. "Old photos can trap you in past trauma," Harper explained, her voice taking on that authoritative tone she used when dispensing wisdom. "We need to focus on creating new memories, not dwelling on old ones." The albums disappeared into the hall closet, replaced by Harper's collection of inspirational books and a small altar she'd constructed from smooth stones and white candles. When I asked about the photos, Mom looked genuinely confused, as if she'd forgotten they'd ever existed. "Oh, those old things? Harper's right, they were just collecting dust." Dust. 30 years of family memories reduced to dust. The dinner conversations followed the same pattern. For 3 years, Mom and Dad had included me in their discussions about everything: Dad's work at the hardware store, Mom's doctor appointments, their concerns about the future. But now those conversations happened during the day, when I was at the office, leaving me with only the sanitized dinner table version of their lives. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Mom would ask when I got home. But it was perfunctory. The kind of question you ask because it's expected, not because you actually want to know the answer. Meanwhile, Harper would launch into detailed accounts of her breakthrough sessions with imaginary clients, her plans for expanding her practice, her insights about dysfunctional family patterns. Mom and Dad hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and offering encouragement. When I tried to share something from my own day, a difficult client at the accounting firm, a problem I'd solved, even just a funny story, the conversation would somehow circle back to Harper within minutes. "That reminds me of something my client Rebecca said," Harper would interject, and suddenly we were talking about her again. I started eating dinner in the kitchen, standing at the counter while they sat at the dining room table. It was easier than watching them perform their Harper-centered family dinner theater. The physical changes in the house were more obvious but somehow less painful than the emotional ones. Harper had claimed the master bedroom, but she didn't stop there. She gradually expanded her territory, moving her meditation cushions into the living room, her essential oil diffusers into the hallway, her vision boards and affirmation cards into the kitchen. "I'm just trying to create a more intentional living space," she explained when I found her crystals arranged on the windowsill where Mom used to keep her ceramic roosters. "Everything in this house should serve a purpose." Apparently, my purpose was to be invisible. My belongings started disappearing, not dramatically. Harper was too smart for that. But my coffee mug would end up in the dishwasher when I'd left it on the counter. My mail would be organized into neat piles that I couldn't find. My laptop charger would migrate to different rooms, always with an innocent explanation. "I was just cleaning," Harper would say with a helpful smile. "I put it somewhere safe." Safe. As if I couldn't be trusted with my own possessions. The worst part was watching my parents adapt to this new reality as if it were perfectly normal. Dad started asking Harper's opinion about everything: which brand of lawn fertilizer to buy, whether he should get a haircut, if he should apply for a better position at the hardware store. "Harper understands people," he'd say when I questioned why he was taking career advice from someone whose last 3 business ventures had failed spectacularly. "She has insights." Mom was even worse. She started scheduling her day around Harper's needs. Grocery shopping when Harper was meditating. Doctor appointments when Harper was out for her mindful walks. Even her phone calls with her sister timed to avoid disrupting Harper's energy work. "Harper's going through such a transformation," Mom would whisper, as if we were in a library instead of our own kitchen. "We need to give her space to heal." Space to heal. In the house I'd saved, using the utilities I paid for, eating the food I bought. The breaking point came 6 weeks into Harper's residency. When I overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for my ears, I'd come home early from work with a migraine, planning to lie down in the den before dinner. But as I approached the living room, I heard my name and stopped, pressing myself against the wall like a spy in my own house. "I'm worried about Samantha," Harper was saying, her voice heavy with concern. "She seems so stuck." Stuck? Mom's voice was uncertain, like she was trying to understand a concept that hadn't occurred to her. "She's 31. Mom. She should have her own life by now, her own place, her own relationships. Instead, she's living in her childhood bedroom, working the same job she's had for 15 years, spending her evenings at home with her parents." There was a pause, and I could picture Dad nodding thoughtfully. He'd always been susceptible to Harper's psychological interpretations. "I mean, I love her," Harper continued. "But this isn't healthy. For her or for you and Dad, you're enabling her dependency." Dependency. The word hit me like a physical blow. I was dependent on them, according to Harper, not the other way around. "Maybe you're right," Dad said slowly. "We've been so grateful for her help over the years. We never thought about what it might be doing to her development." "Exactly," Harper said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "She's been so focused on taking care of everyone else, she's forgotten how to take care of herself. It's actually a form of codependency." Mom made a soft sound of distress. "Oh, poor Samantha. How did we let this happen?" "It's not your fault," Harper assured her. "These patterns develop over time. But now that we recognize it, we can help her break free." Break free. From the house I owned. From the family I'd sacrificed everything to save. I crept back to the front door and slammed it loudly, announcing my presence. By the time I reached the living room, they were discussing Harper's latest business idea as if the conversation about my dependency had never happened. But everything had changed. I could see it in the way they looked at me, not with gratitude or love, but with pity. Poor Samantha, so stuck in her patterns. Poor Samantha, so afraid to grow up. Poor Samantha, who needed their help to break free from her unhealthy attachment to home. That night, I lay on the fold-out couch in the den, staring at the ceiling and listening to Harper's voice drift down from the master bedroom as she conducted a phone session with a client. She was talking about toxic family dynamics and the importance of healthy boundaries. And I wondered if she was describing us or if this was just her standard script. It didn't matter. The message was clear. I was the problem. I was the one who needed to change. I was the one who needed to leave. But Harper had made one critical error in her campaign to erase me from the family narrative. She'd assumed that shame would be enough to drive me away. That I'd slink off into the night rather than face the uncomfortable truth about my dependency. She didn't know that I'd been planning for this moment for 3 years, waiting for her to overplay her hand. She didn't know that every insult, every manipulation, every casual cruelty was being carefully cataloged in my memory, building toward the moment when I'd finally have enough. She didn't know that the house she was trying to claim had already been claimed by someone else, someone who'd been invisible for so long. She'd forgotten I was dangerous. I didn't rage. I didn't confront. I didn't pack my bags and storm out in a dramatic display of wounded pride. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I planned. The morning after I overheard their conversation about my dependency, I sat at my desk at Morrison & Associates, staring at spreadsheets while my mind worked through the logistics of what was coming. My colleagues probably thought I was having an unusually productive day. The way I attacked those quarterly reports with laser focus. But I wasn't thinking about depreciation schedules or tax liabilities. I was thinking about eviction notices and property law. Harper had made her move. Now it was time for me to make mine. The first call was to my lawyer, David Martinez, who'd handled the mortgage refinancing 3 years ago. He remembered me, of course. I'd been the miracle client who'd walked in with a cashier's check and perfect credit when everyone else was defaulting. "Samantha," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "How's the house treating you?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, closing my office door and lowering my voice. "I need to discuss my options regarding unwanted tenants." There was a pause, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "Are we talking about your parents?" "My parents and my sister, the sister who's decided I need to find my own place." David's laugh was dry. "Let me guess, she doesn't know you own the house." "She has no idea. And neither do my parents, really. They know I helped with the mortgage, but they think we're all just living together as a family." More paper shuffling. "Well, legally, you have every right to determine who lives in your house. Since none of them are on the deed or the mortgage, they're essentially tenants at will. You can terminate their tenancy with proper notice." "What kind of notice?" "In this state, 30 days for tenants at will. But..." He paused, and I could hear the caution in his voice. "Samantha, are you sure you want to do this? We're talking about your family here." I thought about Harper's voice drifting down from the master bedroom, dispensing advice about toxic family dynamics. I thought about my parents' pitying looks, their concerns about my development. I thought about 3 years of invisibility, of being the family ghost who kept everything running while everyone else got to live. "I'm sure," I said. "All right then, I'll draft the notice. But you might want to consider having a conversation with them first. Explain the situation, give them a chance to..." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. No conversations, no explanations, no chances. I want them to understand exactly what it feels like to be blindsided. David was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow." The second call was to my bank, confirming the mortgage payment history and getting copies of all relevant documents. The third was to the county recorder's office, requesting certified copies of the deed. The fourth was to my insurance company, making sure I understood my coverage in case of property damage during the transition. I was thorough, I was methodical, I was everything Harper had never expected me to be. While I worked, I watched my family's routine with new eyes. Harper held court in the living room every evening, regaling Mom and Dad with stories from her coaching practice. She'd set up a small whiteboard where she drew diagrams of healthy relationship dynamics and personal growth frameworks. My parents listened with the reverence of disciples receiving divine wisdom. "The key," Harper would say, marker in hand, "is understanding that some people are comfortable with stagnation. They resist change because it threatens their sense of security." Mom would nod thoughtfully. "Like people who stay in the same job for too long?" "Exactly. Or people who live in their childhood homes well into adulthood. It's a form of emotional stunting." Dad would murmur agreement while I sat in the kitchen, paying the bills that kept their enlightenment sessions possible. I let them talk. I let them analyze. I let them diagnose my psychological deficiencies with the confidence of people who'd read too many self-help books. Every word they spoke was another nail in their own coffin. Another piece of evidence that they'd made their choice. They'd chosen Harper's narrative over my reality. They'd chosen comfort over gratitude. They'd chosen to see me as a problem to be solved rather than a daughter who'd solved their problems. 2 weeks into my preparation, Harper escalated her campaign. She started leaving real estate listings on the kitchen counter, apartments in my price range, condos with great potential for a young professional. She'd highlight features she thought I'd like: in-unit laundry, proximity to my office, pet-friendly policies. "I saw this cute place downtown," she'd say over breakfast, sliding a printout across the table. "It would be perfect for you. Very modern, very independent." "I'm not looking for a place," I'd reply, not looking up from my coffee. "But you should be. You're 31. Sam, Don't you want your own space, your own life? I'd shrug, playing my part perfectly. I'm comfortable here. Harper would exchange glances with Mom and Dad, the kind of looks that said, "See? This is exactly what we were talking about." They thought my resistance proved their point about my dependency, my fear of change, my inability to grow. They had no idea that I was growing, just not in the direction they expected. The final piece fell into place 3 weeks after I'd started planning. Harper announced that she'd found the perfect office space for her coaching practice, a small suite in a wellness center downtown. The rent was reasonable, the energy was excellent, and it would give her the professional credibility she needed to attract higher-paying clients. "The only thing is," she said, her voice taking on that persuasive tone she used when she wanted something, "I'll need to use the house as collateral for the security deposit and first month's rent, just temporarily, until my client base builds up." Dad looked uncertain. "I don't know, Harper. The house it's perfect." Harper interrupted. "This is exactly the kind of investment our family should be making. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger." She had it all planned out. She'd use the house as collateral, establish her business, and gradually take over the mortgage payments. By the time her lease was up, she'd have enough income to buy Mom and Dad out entirely. They could retire to Florida, and she'd have the house she'd always considered her birthright. It was a beautiful plan. It was also completely illegal, since she didn't own the house she was planning to leverage. "I think it's a wonderful idea," Mom said, her eyes bright with pride. "Don't you, Samantha?" All three of them looked at me expectantly. Harper's smile was confident, almost smug. She thought she'd cornered me, that I'd either have to support her scheme or reveal myself as the jealous, small-minded sister who wanted to hold her back. I smiled back, letting them see exactly what they expected to see: resignation, defeat, the inevitable surrender of someone who'd finally been outmaneuvered. "It sounds like you've thought of everything," I said. Harper's smile widened. "I have. This is going to be great for all of us." She was right about that, just not in the way she imagined. Because while she'd been planning her takeover, I'd been planning something much more permanent. While she'd been playing chess, I'd been building a nuclear weapon. The papers were ready. The lawyer was on standby. The bank accounts were secured. All I needed now was the right moment to detonate everything they thought they knew about their comfortable little world. I didn't have to wait long. Harper's impatience had always been her weakness, and she was about to make it mine to exploit. The moment arrived on a Sunday evening in June, 3 months and 2 weeks after Harper had moved back home. She'd chosen the setting carefully, the dining room, with its warm lighting and family photos that she'd allowed back onto the walls now that her energy work had progressed. The good china was out, the candles were lit, and she'd even bought wine for the occasion. Harper had always understood the power of staging. "I have something important to discuss with everyone," she announced as we settled into our seats. She'd positioned herself at the head of the table, Dad's usual spot, while he sat to her right like a lieutenant awaiting orders. Mom beamed at her from across the table, already glowing with pride before Harper had even spoken. I took my usual seat, the one closest to the kitchen, and waited. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family dynamics," Harper began, cutting into her roast beef with surgical precision. "And I've realized that we've all been enabling some pretty unhealthy patterns." "Here it comes," I thought, taking a sip of wine. "I mean, look at us," she continued, gesturing around the table with her fork. "Mom and Dad, you're in your 60s. You should be enjoying your retirement, traveling, pursuing your passions. Instead, you're stuck in this house, taking care of—" She paused, letting her eyes settle on me with what she probably thought was compassionate concern. "Well, taking care of someone who should be taking care of herself." Dad shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't contradict her. Mom just nodded, her expression growing more troubled with each word. "I've been researching this," Harper said, pulling out a small notebook. She'd always been theatrical about her research. "It's called failure to launch syndrome. It's incredibly common, especially in families where one child becomes overly comfortable with the parental safety net. She read from her notes, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when she wanted to sound professional. Adults who fail to achieve independence often exhibit patterns of financial dependence, social isolation, and resistance to change. They may appear to be helping the family, but they're actually avoiding the challenges of adult life. The description was clinical, devastating, and completely false. But I could see it landing exactly as Harper intended. Mom's face was creased with worry, and Dad had that look he got when he was trying to solve a problem that was bigger than him. "I don't understand," Mom said softly. "Samantha's always been so responsible. She's helped us so much over the years." "And that's exactly the problem," Harper replied, her voice gentle but firm. "She's been helping you instead of helping herself. She's been using your needs as an excuse to avoid facing her own life." I set down my wine glass and looked at Harper directly. "That's an interesting theory." "It's not a theory," she said, meeting my gaze with the confidence of someone who thought she held all the cards. "It's a recognized psychological pattern, and I think it's time we addressed it." "Addressed it how?" Harper smiled, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to corner me in the playground, who knew exactly how to hurt me in ways that looked like kindness to watching adults. "I think it's time for you to find your own place," she said. "Your own life, your own path to independence." The words hung in the air like smoke. Dad was staring at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. Mom was wringing her hands, torn between her instinct to protect me and her desire to support Harper's professional insight. "You have 3 days," Harper continued, her voice steady and certain. 3 days to start looking for apartments, to figure out your next steps, to begin the process of becoming the person you're meant to be. She reached across the table and patted my hand with false sympathy. "I know it sounds scary, but this is what love looks like sometimes. Tough love. The kind of love that helps people grow instead of keeping them small." I looked around the table at my family, the people I'd sacrificed everything to save, the people who were now watching me with pity and concern while Harper delivered her ultimatum in my own house. 3 days, I repeated quietly. 3 days. Harper confirmed. "I'm only doing this because I care about you, Sam. Because I want to see you succeed." The silence stretched between us, thick with expectation. They were waiting for me to break down, to argue, to beg for more time. They expected tears, protestations, maybe even anger. They expected the helpless, dependent person Harper had painted me as. Instead, I reached for my purse. "That's interesting," I said, pulling out the manila envelope I'd been carrying for weeks. "Because I've been thinking about our living situation too." Harper's smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" I opened the envelope with deliberate care, spreading the documents across the table like a dealer revealing a winning hand. The deed, with my name in bold letters. The mortgage statements, showing 3 years of payments from my account. The bank records, documenting every sacrifice I'd made while she was in Florida playing guru. "I mean," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "that you might want to reconsider who needs to find somewhere else to live." Harper stared at the papers, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, something approaching horror. "What is this?" "This is the deed to the house," I explained, pointing to the relevant document. "As you can see, it's in my name. Has been for 3 years. Dad leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "I don't understand. The house is..." "The house is mine," I said simply. "I bought it when you were about to lose it to foreclosure. I've been paying the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance. I've been keeping the lights on and the heat running. I've been maintaining the property you've all been living in." Mom's face had gone pale. "But sweetheart, you never said..." "I never said because I thought we were family," I replied. "I thought that what was mine was yours, and what was yours was mine. I thought that saving the house meant saving all of us." Harper was shaking her head, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. This is some kind of mistake. You can't just. I can do whatever I want, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her protests like a blade. Because it's my house, my mortgage, my decision. I pulled out the final document, the eviction notice that David Martinez had prepared. Official and legal and absolutely devastating. Which brings me to my own announcement, I continued, sliding the notice across the table. You all have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave my property. The silence that followed was deafening. Harper's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mom made a small, wounded sound. Dad just stared at the eviction notice as if it were written in a foreign language. 24 hours, I repeated, standing up from the table. That should give you plenty of time to start the process of becoming the people you're meant to be. Harper found her voice first, her shock transforming into fury. You can't do this. This is insane. This is what property ownership looks like, I said calmly. This is what independence looks like. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. I walked toward the kitchen, then turned back to face them one last time. Oh, and Harper? You might want to call that wellness center and let them know you won't be needing that office space after all. Something tells me your business plan just hit a snag. The roast beef was getting cold, the wine was growing warm, and the candles were still flickering cheerfully as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The power dynamic that had defined our family for decades had just been obliterated with a few pieces of paper and the truth I'd been hiding for 3 years. I'd been invisible for so long that they'd forgotten I was there. But invisible people see everything, and they remember everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're the ones who hold all the real power. The explosion came exactly as I'd expected it would. Harper shot up from her chair so fast it toppled backward, crashing to the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Her face had gone from pale to flushed to something approaching purple, and her hands were shaking as she pointed at me across the table. You vindictive, manipulative bitch, she screamed, her carefully cultivated wellness guru persona shattering like glass. You planned this. You've been planning this whole thing. I have, I said calmly, not moving from my position near the kitchen door. For 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Ever since you moved back home and decided I needed to find my own place. This is about control. Harper's voice cracked with rage. This is about you trying to punish us for not what? I asked. My voice still level despite the adrenaline singing in my veins. For not thanking me, for not acknowledging what I did, for not treating me like family instead of hired help? Mom had started crying, soft, helpless sobs that might have moved me 3 hours ago. But I'd heard her laugh at Harper's jokes about my dependency too many times to be swayed by tears now. Samantha, please, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. We can talk about this. We can work something out. Work something out? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I've already worked something out. I've got a moving truck scheduled for tomorrow morning. I've contacted a storage facility. I've even arranged for a cleaning service to come in after you leave. Harper's laugh was bitter and sharp. You really think you can just kick us out, your own family? I don't think it. I know it. Because unlike you, I actually understand how property law works. I gestured to the eviction notice still sitting on the table. That's a legal document. Harper? Signed by a judge, enforceable by the sheriff's department if necessary. You're bluffing, she said. But I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Am I? I pulled out another document, the one I'd been saving for exactly this moment. This is a restraining order, temporary, but renewable. It prevents you from coming within 500 feet of this property after tomorrow at 6 p.m. Harper's face went white. You can't do that. I can do that. I did do that. All I had to do was tell the judge about your threats, your attempts to manipulate my elderly parents into signing over property they don't own, your harassment campaign designed to force me out of my own home. I never threatened anyone. No. I pulled out my phone again and played a recording. Harper's voice filled the dining room. Crystal clear. She needs to understand that this isn't healthy. For her, or for you and Dad, you're enabling her dependency by letting her stay here. Harper's mouth fell open. You recorded us? I recorded everything, every conversation about my psychological problems, every discussion about how I needed to be launched into independence, every plan you made to use this house as collateral for your business ventures. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Amazing what people will say when they think the hired help isn't listening. Mom was looking between us with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Samantha, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you explain? Explain what? I asked, and for the first time, real emotion crept into my voice. That I liquidated my retirement to save your house? That I gave up my apartment and my independence to keep you from being homeless? That I've been working 60-hour weeks for 3 years to pay a mortgage you didn't even know existed? We would have, Dad started. You would have what? I interrupted. Thanked me? Treated me like an equal instead of a burden? Told Harper to back off when she started her campaign to get rid of me? The silence stretched between us, heavy with 3 years of unspoken resentment and carefully buried truth. I saved you, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I saved all of you. And the moment someone told you I was the problem, you believed it. You didn't question it. You didn't defend me. You just nodded along and agreed that I needed to be fixed. Harper was shaking her head frantically. That's not... We were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves, I shot back. You wanted me gone so you could play happy family without the inconvenient reminder of what it actually costs to keep this house. This is insane, Harper shouted. You're destroying our family over some twisted need for revenge. I'm not destroying anything, I replied. I'm simply no longer maintaining it. There's a difference. I walked back to the table and began gathering the documents, sliding them back into the envelope with deliberate care. You have 24 hours to remove your belongings from my property. The utilities will be shut off at 7 p.m. tomorrow. The locks will be changed at 8 p.m. If you're still here after that, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Where are we supposed to go? Mom asked, her voice small and broken. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm sure Harper has some ideas. She's been giving advice about independent living for months now. Time to put that expertise to use. Harper's face had gone through rage and was settling into something colder and more calculating. You think you've won something here? You think this makes you better than us? I think this makes us even, I replied. You wanted to teach me about independence? Congratulations. You're about to get a masterclass. You're going to regret this, Harper hissed. When you're sitting in this house all alone, with no family, no one who cares about you, you're going to realize what you've thrown away. I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the perfectly styled hair, the expensive clothes, the righteous indignation of someone who'd never had to sacrifice anything for anyone else. Harper, I said quietly, I've been alone in this house for 3 years. The only difference is that now I won't have to listen to you explain why that's my fault. I turned to Mom and Dad, who were still sitting at the table like mourners at a funeral. I'm sorry it came to this. I really am. But you made your choice when you decided Harper was right about what I needed. Now you get to live with the consequences. The clock on the mantel chimed 9 times, marking the end of our last family dinner. The candles were burning low, casting dancing shadows across the ruins of everything we'd pretended to be. 24 hours, I repeated, heading for the stairs. I suggest you start packing. Behind me, Harper's voice rose in a final, desperate protest. This isn't over. You can't just... I paused at the foot of the stairs and looked back at her one last time. Harper? What? It's my house. I said simply. I can do whatever I want. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like the absolute truth. They left the next morning without saying goodbye. I watched from my bedroom window as the moving truck pulled up at 7 a.m. sharp, Harper's efficiency serving her well, even in defeat. She'd managed to organize everything overnight. probably making dozens of phone calls and pulling strings I didn't even know existed. Even in crisis, she was still Harper, still the one who made things happen. Dad carried boxes with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. His movements were careful, deliberate, like he was afraid that any sudden motion might shatter whatever fragile composure he'd managed to build. Mom followed behind him, clutching a small suitcase and looking lost in a way that almost broke my resolve. Almost. Harper emerged from the house carrying her crystals and essential oils, her face set in a mask of cold fury. She looked up at my window once, and I saw something there that might have been respect mixed with hatred. She'd always been competitive, but this was the first time she'd lost so completely that there was no narrative to spin, no way to reframe defeat as victory. I didn't go downstairs. I didn't offer to help. I didn't say goodbye. By 3 p.m., they were gone. The house felt different immediately, not just quieter, but lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd carried for so long had finally been lifted. I walked through the rooms, noting what they'd taken and what they'd left behind. Mom's ceramic roosters were gone from the kitchen windowsill, but the herb garden she'd planted was still there. Dad's tools were missing from the garage, but the workbench he'd built remained. Harper had been thorough, taking everything that belonged to her and nothing that didn't. Even in rage, she was precise. The master bedroom was empty except for the built-in furniture, wiped clean of any trace that she'd ever been there. The meditation altar in the living room was gone, but she'd left the stones arranged in a perfect circle on the coffee table. A final message, maybe, or just Harper being Harper. I found myself in the kitchen that evening, standing at the same counter where I'd eaten so many solitary dinners while they performed their family theater in the dining room. The silence was complete. No Harper's voice drifting down from upstairs. No Mom and Dad's murmured conversations. No television background noise. For the first time in 3 years, I was truly alone in my own house. I made myself a simple dinner: pasta with marinara sauce, a glass of decent wine, a salad from the garden Mom had tended. I ate at the dining room table, in the chair I'd been relegated to for so long, and watched the candles flicker in the quiet. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Over the next few days, I began to reclaim the space I'd never really allowed myself to inhabit. I moved into the master bedroom, setting up my laptop on the desk by the window where I could see the garden. I replaced Harper's flowing white curtains with something more practical. I put my books on the shelves that had held her inspirational texts. I hung my diplomas on the wall, the accounting degree I'd earned while working full-time, the CPA certification I'd pursued in night school, the professional development certificates I'd collected over 15 years of building a career. Credentials that Harper had dismissed as playing small, but that had actually built the foundation for everything we'd had. The house began to feel like mine for the first time since I'd bought it. I changed the locks on Thursday. As promised, I didn't need to. They were gone and wouldn't be coming back. But it felt symbolic somehow. A final closing of a chapter I'd written in invisible ink. On Friday, I got a text from Mom. "We're staying with your Aunt Marie for now. We found a small apartment. Move in next week. Hope you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'm glad you found a place. I'm fine." She responded immediately, "We love you." I believed her. I also knew it didn't matter anymore. Love without respect, love without gratitude, love that came with conditions and expectations. I'd had enough of that kind of love to last a lifetime. Saturday brought a surprise visitor. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on the door with a casserole and a knowing smile. "I saw the moving truck," she said, settling into the kitchen chair Mom used to occupy. "About time you got your house back." "You knew." "Honey, I've lived next door for 20 years. I watched you come and go at all hours, working yourself to death to keep this place running. I watched your sister waltz in here like she owned the place." She patted my hand. "I also watched you grow a backbone. Good for you." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged what I'd actually done, what I'd actually sacrificed. The validation felt better than I'd expected. That night, I sat in my living room, my living room, and thought about what came next. I had a house that was finally mine. I had a career that was stable and growing. I had savings again. Now that I wasn't supporting 3 adults on one salary, I had possibilities. For the first time in years, I could think about my own future without factoring in everyone else's needs. I could travel, I could date, I could pursue the interests I'd set aside to manage other people's crises. I could be the person I'd been before I became the family's designated problem solver. Sunday morning, I woke up in the master bedroom and made coffee in a kitchen that stayed exactly the way I left it. I sat in the garden Mom had planted, reading a book I'd chosen for myself, drinking coffee that was as strong as I liked it. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. I thought about Harper sometimes, wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience or if she'd just added it to her collection of stories about toxic family dynamics. I thought about Mom and Dad, hoped they were adjusting to their new life, hoped they were beginning to understand what they'd lost. But mostly, I thought about the future. About the woman I'd been before I became invisible, and the woman I could become now that I was finally seen. I'd spent 3 years being the ghost in my own life. Now I was finally ready to be the main character. The house was quiet, but it was mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like enough. Thank you for listening to this story of family, sacrifice, and reclaiming power. I hope Samantha's journey resonated with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts about family dynamics, boundaries, and standing up for yourself. Your engagement helps me continue creating content that explores the complex relationships that shape our lives.